This morning, there's growing confidence in the global energy markets as more and more ships are making it through the Strait of Hormuz. Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent has confirmed oil tankers have successfully traveled through that choke point, and even a small number of tankers can make a really big impact on prices.
Again, any supply is helpful, and we want to get back to normal. The market is in deficit about 10 to 12 million barrels a day, and we're making up for that deficit.
So following up on our coverage of the massive U.S. bunker busting strike on Isfahan, Iran last night, I think it's increasingly looking like our theory on this might be vindicated. And to recap that, what we speculated yesterday is that although, sure, it may seem on the surface like common sense that, hey, the U.S. is dropping massive bombs on Iran, this is clear proof that the negotiations have broke down, the quasi-ceasefire is over, and we're back here to total all-out war and fighting, that there is also the alternative possibility. We pointed out that Isfahan, and this particular military base, is known to be a missile city. It is a massive stronghold of the IRGC, right? The Iranian Revolutionary Guard that we know are the hardliners within the government. These are the very people who don't want talks with the United States. They want to exert maximum control. They want to fight this on till the very end. That it could have actually been sort of an intentional piece of leverage to neutralize or take power away from the Iranian hardliners and give it more so to the moderates who do want to have negotiations with the United States. Who knows? It may have been a coordinated plan even between the U.S. and those Iranian moderates to say, hey, psst, hey, quietly, we're going to tell you the IRGC's hanging out here if you want to have stronger negotiations, right? And to be clear, we still don't know for 100%, but I am looking at the signs that you would, for example, think after watching this massive fireball go up over Iran, and we know that it was the U.S. that led this strike, that, hey, there would be some panic over Iranian retaliation in the Strait of Hormuz, yet we're watching the opposite. After the U.S. took out this Iranian military base, suddenly we're watching increased traffic across the Strait of Hormuz today. We're listening to Donald Trump and others point out, hey, the Strait of Hormuz is more or less effectively open. You just have to go out there and take it and ensure your own security there, speaking to other countries. And you even look at the words of the Iranian president. Now, to recap, this is someone who we widely believe to be maybe a more moderate within the government. He's signaled many times he's willing to talk. But today, once again, after his country got bombed massively, right, is saying that Iran is ready to end the war with the U.S., but with guarantees. And so he's still kind of maintaining this stance for the public and the sake of saving face that, you know, Iran has its own negotiations, its own thing that it wants. But after this announcement, we quite curiously watched a surge of the U.S. stock market, for example, the Dow Jones, which is up almost 3 points today, and a slight decrease in the drop of oil prices in the United States. So we're putting this all together to say, it does seem like what we may have thought could be the case yesterday, it's strongly possible actually is true here, in that this was a coordinated attack. This was not Trump fuming and saying the negotiations aren't working, bomb Iran. We hit this place on purpose, and the strong argument could be made. We actually dealt a massive blow here to the IRGC, and it's possible, right? I'm not here to be overly optimistic about it. I'm not saying that, well, this clearly means that it's over, because sure, we still might have to do a lot more to the hardliners. But, you know, watching the Strait of Hormuz and everything today, you just have to say it is really interesting. And I will repeat, from the moment we saw this strike and we knew about Isfahan, you know, we did speculate on that if you watch yesterday's video. So let's get into this, guys. What's happened in Iran ever since this attack? First, though, guys, do us a favor. If you enjoy our content, make sure you hit that like button down below. Subscribe to the channel if you are new. That's the best way to support our work, and it also ensures that you can stay up to date with all of the latest news and coverage. And that said, taking a listen this morning to the Pentagon press conference, we once again have the Secretary of War stating that if Iran is wise, they will cut a deal, right? And still talking tough, but, you know, this is a admission that negotiations clearly in some sense are indeed still happening despite this strike, which again does seem to suggest this was not a sign that the U.S. was walking away from the negotiating table, which yesterday we speculated probably was the case. Take a listen.
The video the president posted last night of Isfahan, an ammo depot struck by U.S. bombers. You see, you don't get to see many of those videos because, as a reminder, Iran has still shut off the internet to 99.9% of its population. But if Iran is wise, they will cut a deal. President Trump doesn't bluff, and he does not back down. You can ask Khomeini about that.
So yeah, you heard that. And what we've seen since in the past 24 hours following the U.S. attack is actually, quite surprisingly, in something that might defy common logic, a pretty noticeable uptick, an increase of traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. And in total fairness, this is not exactly what we might call business as normal, but you do notice it is a little bit bigger than even it was before. And conventionally, you would think the opposite should be true, because typically when America or Israel has bombed Iran, Iran tries to retaliate. They shoot some ballistic missiles back. And as a result, the tankers in the Middle East are too scared to leave. And usually, right, it's just very common sense. The more tension you see, the more fighting that intensifies in Iran, then yes, traffic through the strait will logically decrease. Yet we've seen the opposite. Why could that maybe be the case, right? If not for the fact our theory is correct on this, hey, we may have just dealt a major blow to the IRGC, and there's a little bit more happening here behind the scenes than perhaps meets the initial eye, which Secretary Hegseth further confirmed today. There are actually more vessels flowing today through the Strait of Hormuz than there were previously, which, I repeat, defies what you might conventionally think.
Appreciate both questions. On the Strait of Hormuz, there are many more vessels flowing through today than there were, as the president has arranged. The president's been clear to Iran, open it for business, or we have options, and we certainly do. And when you look at what the chairman laid out with the Navy industrial base, with coastal cruise missiles, with UAVs, with counter-mine capabilities, we've been focused from the beginning on attriting and defeating those capabilities and limiting their options. There's lots we're doing as well, some of which is known, some of which is not known, to set the conditions.
And you notice that very specific word choice as well. The president arranged for this to happen, also noting there are things happening behind the scenes, which is to say, this Strait of Hormuz traffic that you can see today is not exactly some type of accident. It is part of something deliberate, whether that's the fact that, well, despite maybe the narrative that we can't open the Strait of Hormuz, Iran has checkmated us, they have total control, that I don't know. Maybe the U.S. operations over the past couple of days have actually been incredibly effective in diminishing Iran's capability to harass the strait. We do know, for example, that the IRGC naval commanders who were leading that harassment got taken out. There are mine clearing activities, et cetera, et cetera. It could be that. It could also be perhaps that the president succeeded with diplomacy. You know, we've heard that talk as well about how, well, he's talking to negotiators. He managed to get some oil tankers through. But either way, clearly something is going on here, I repeat, than simply meets the eye, and it actually, I think, is definitely a good thing for the potential that maybe the energy crisis aspect of this can be mitigated to a very serious degree. Because, of course, that's the fear, is that if this thing keeps on escalating, oh, Iran's going to control the Strait of Hormuz forever, what's going on? I have long speculated. I don't think that the U.S. is going to simply sit there and allow Iran to exact controls over the strait or impose tolls or something, just seize an international waterway on behalf of their own, which I would also point out for the supposedly international law-obsessed crowd is blatantly illegal, okay? But no, I don't think Trump's going to allow that to happen, whether it requires opening the strait by force and or opening it by diplomacy. The idea that the U.S. cannot do these things, and just because Iran has harassed the strait for a couple of weeks now, it means they're going to do it forever, I always found to be a ridiculous theory. Like, obviously we can open the strait, right? It's just a matter of kind of the wait and seeing of it. There is sort of a predicament we're in because, yeah, if we use too much military force, then if Iran retaliates, yeah, they might not do too much damage, but if they start blowing up energy infrastructure in the Middle East, there's an oil crisis problem we have. So, yeah, there's an aspect of this that needs to be calculated and careful. But I repeat, the idea that America can't do it has always been propaganda. It's ridiculous. And you're seeing the proof of that today, right? Something's going on here. Now, President Trump further put out the statement, quote, all of those countries that can't get jet fuel because of the Strait of Hormuz, like the United Kingdom, which refused to get involved in the decapitation of Iran, I have a suggestion for you. Number one, buy from the U.S. We have plenty of it. And by the way, As we talked about in our video on Sunday about Australia, this is going to be another outcome of this conflict long term, and arguably a huge geopolitical gain for the US, which is that many of these countries who in the past were relying on the Middle East for energy, even when it's over, are going to realize, much like they did maybe with China in 2020, that, hey, this is not the most reliable supply chain. We need to become energy reliant, if we have to be energy reliant, right, on countries that actually can provide us a stable supply, right, that aren't breaking out into war every 2 seconds. And by the way, who is that? Who has the world's single largest supply of oil and natural gas, and who, by the way, in the geopolitical context is relatively stable? That is, of course, the United States. And so we spoke about how a lot of these Western countries who maybe were not super big trading partners with America when it came to energy, now, by the way, are going to have to do it. And that is a huge geopolitical gain long-term for the U.S. Why? It gives us leverage. You want to talk about NATO? You want to talk about economic partnerships? Which countries are going to side with China? Well, of course, the big problem that we have against China, right? We probably win against China in terms of military leverage, but China thus far beats us in economic leverage. Why? They basically have a chokehold over most of the world because most of the world is economically reliant on China. Their economies can't sustain. And so if China exerts that leverage, we might be in a troubling situation there. But now, how does the whole energy situation change it? Well, America has a huge competitive advantage over China and most of the world when it comes to the control of oil and natural gas, because guess what? We have a lot. If we start exporting and selling that to other countries, not only would that make us a bunch of money, but it also equalizes the playing field with China, right? Because you might look at some of these countries in Asia or even in Europe and say, sure, your consumer economy may be super reliant on Chinese goods. We get that. But your energy is reliant on us. So now we're on an even playing field, you understand? And obviously, when it comes to that rivalry with China in the 21st century, clearly a lot of it is economic. Everyone's sort of fighting for soft power and leverage over certain countries. So this is going to be a huge thing to watch. I repeat, a lot of people have argued, oh, Trump is burning down NATO. He doesn't know what he's doing. Our geopolitical alliances are falling apart. I don't think that's the case, right? Certainly, we're exerting a lot of pressure on them. Certainly, something like NATO may be in a troubling spot long term if Europe proves that they are useless military allies. But let me point out, on the economic front, these countries are not going anywhere. As a matter of fact, they're only going to grow closer ties with the United States. Not because they want to necessarily, but because they have to. Because why? Guess what? Long-term conclusion of this conflict, the Middle East is no longer a reliable source of your country's energy, and it's stupid to become reliant on it. So a lot of countries are looking for alternatives. Who's the big alternative in the world? Well, it can't be Russia because Russia's very sanctioned and we know the situation there. So inevitably, it's going to be America for energy. Keep an eye on that. Anyways, that's besides the point. So yes, Trump is saying, hey, buy energy from America. We have a lot of it. That is true. But number two, build up some delayed courage, go to the Strait and just take it. You'll have to start learning how to fight for yourself. The USA won't be there to help you anymore, just like you weren't there for us. Iran has been essentially decimated. That hard part is done. Here's a very key phrase: go get your own oil, coming from President Trump. And hey, maybe to an extent, we're watching the Strait of Hormuz. Maybe they are getting their own oil, in total fairness.
The president was clear this morning in his truth that there are countries around the world who ought to be prepared to step up on this critical waterway as well. It's not just the United States Navy. Last time I checked, there was supposed to be a big bad Royal Navy that could be prepared to do things like that as well. So he's pointing out this is an international waterway that we use less than most, in fact, dramatically less than most. So the world ought to pay attention and be prepared to stand up. President Trump's been willing to do the heavy lifting on behalf of the free world to address this threat of Iran. It's not just our problem set going forward, even though we have done the lion's share of preparation to ensure that that strait will be open, which is an outcome the president's been very clear on.
Well, as we've spoken about, the Royal Navy is indeed coming in about 4 to 6 weeks, maybe 4 to 6 years. We don't know if they'll ever show up. As we've spoken about, right, a lot of the European countries are fence-sitting about this. They're slow rolling. They just ultimately are hoping that America solves all the problems for them as usual, right? But who knows? At the same time, this message to the international community and the renewed call that, hey, the strait is there, go get it, also maybe could be a projection of confidence, especially given the fact that, well, oil tankers are moving right now. So something's going on here. I'd also point out the words of the Iranian president himself, right? Because as we've established, we believe this guy is more moderate and sensible, at least compared to the hardliners in the IRGC, which appears to be true based on his public words. As a matter of fact, we covered this story at the beginning of Operation Epic Fury about how he tried to apologize to the Gulf states for attacking them and said Iran shouldn't be doing that. We didn't mean to do that. It was out of confusion. We don't want war with them. And yeah, that's like sensible, right? Hey, let's not open up new countries into the conflict. And then, of course, what happened? The IRGC publicly came out and basically called him a fool and said, don't listen to him, et cetera, et cetera. Reportedly, he also tried to resign, but he can't resign because the supreme leader's comatose and the IRGC won't even let him do it. So there's all this chaos, but he has now once again come out again today to say that Iran is ready to end the war with the U.S., but wants certain guarantees. So, it's like he's saying he still wants certain things, whatever. But keep in mind, when you listen to the IRGC commanders speak about this, or their military spokesperson, their propagandists they always put on TV, you don't even hear, we want to end the war. Right? They always say, no, we're going to punish the U.S. We're not done until, you're going to be completely wiped out, or, you're going to face punishment first. He's not saying that. He's saying, well, we're ready to talk, but we want to be respected at the negotiating table. It is certainly a huge change of pace from what we hear from other potentially Iranian spokespeople. So that goes for the president. That goes for the foreign minister, who's always talking on Western television. We repeat, we do believe these people to be maybe more sensible, more pragmatic, more willing to talk. And ever since this announcement, combined from the president of Iran, president of the United States, Strait of Hormuz traffic, you did notice today, for example, that U.S. stocks have surged in response. Looking at a almost 3% increase on the market today, a gain of over 1,100 points in a single day, which is huge, which is a pretty noticeable increase. Definitely some investor confidence that, hey, maybe something good is happening or is about to happen here. However, I would point out at the same time, you look, for example, at U.S. oil prices. They are down today slightly, but not nearly the big response we saw from the stock market. Still over $100 a barrel, looking at about $102 right now for U.S. crude oil. And that is a slight decrease of close to 1% on the day, but not as significant. So there's definitely still room to sit here and say, well, wait a minute, let's not get too optimistic about things. But definitely, I do think at least the theory that we gave more leverage here to the moderate negotiators in the Iranian government through this attack does seem to be largely vindicated. And pretty interestingly today, we also just got an announcement from China and Pakistan, okay? So China obviously is sort of more of a pro-Iran country, but thus far, they obviously have not come to Iran's aid. We've, by the way, speculated that I don't necessarily think China is all that cool with Iran messing so much with the Strait of Hormuz and fighting the Gulf states, because guess what? While China is a military ally of Iran, they also buy a lot of oil from the Gulf states as well. And so, I think when you look at the CCP, they're extremely self-interested, okay? That's why they don't come out to help anyone else or anything, right? And so, yes, when you mess with their bottom line, you mess with their money. I have said, I don't think Beijing's going to be cool with that. We've seen some signs, by the way, that they're not cool with that. For example, they explicitly came out and condemned Iran for attacking the Gulf states, which also are somewhat, economic partners of China. Well, today, they've released a joint statement along with Pakistan, which is the host country that is mediating the negotiations, calling for an immediate ceasefire. They're urging fast-tracked peace talks and protection of non-military targets. The plan also stresses securing key shipping lanes and respecting the UN Charter and return to a full reopening of the Strait of Hormuz. Why is that important, right? Well, we repeat. So China is coming and saying they believe the UN Charter should be respected in the Strait of Hormuz. Now, obviously, it's international law, whatever. The UN doesn't mean anything. But I would point out, right, what Beijing is saying by this is that they disagree with what Iran's doing right now in the Strait of Hormuz. Because, as you know, Iran basically is claiming ownership over it. They're trying to charge tolls and stuff on, different ships crossing the route. And this is a violation of the UN Charter. This is a violation of international law. Because The Strait of Hormuz is in what? International waters. Iran doesn't own it. And so, yes, it is illegal for countries to come in and exert control over commercial shipping, right? So we know that to be the case. However, right, very interestingly, China is basically coming out not just on America's side, but the whole world side and saying, no, the IRGC should not be harassing the Strait of Hormuz. China is saying that now, right? So again, that's very interesting. All right, something here is going on for sure. And yeah, when Iran has even lost, obviously, China quite publicly when it comes to what they're doing with the Strait, you have to consider, of course, how long their harassment or their ability to harass commercial shipping through that part of the world is going to continue. So very noteworthy there. A lot of things are piling on. Again, Iran president says he wants to negotiate. Traffic going through the Strait of Hormuz, et cetera, et cetera. But now even Xi Jinping is saying he wants the Strait of Hormuz to remain under the control of international waterway rules, not a fake Iranian annexation of it. That's big. That's big news. And as I predicted, by the way, the more that Iran acts like fools, the more they're actually going to burn Beijing in the process. They may think they're kind of like trapping Beijing into really acting or coming to their defense because whatever they have to, the war is intensifying. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. Xi Jinping is incredibly selfish. And as we predicted, he is not cool with his own oil supply from the Gulf states being messed with for a very massive country. And he's now coming out saying that publicly. Very, very interesting. But that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Where do you think this is going to end? Let me know. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel if you are new. And until next time, God bless and peace.